سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Before I start this week's lesson, just a quick reminder of what we discussed in last week's lesson. In last week's lesson, I mentioned the incidents, or to be more precise, the hadith, which can be found in Sahih al-Bukhari, which led to the verses of tayammum being revealed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And I also mentioned the conditions which needs to be found for tayammum to be correct. And then finally, I then went on to mention the procedure of performing tayammum. Now, inshallah, in this week's lesson, lesson number 5, we will start by looking at the niyat section of tayammum. And Imam Quduri rahmatullah alayhi says, وَالنِّيَّةُ فَرْضٌ فِي التَّيَمُّمِ وَمُسْتَحَبَّةٌ فِي الْوُضُوءِ. That niyat or intention is farz in tayammum, whereas it is considered mustahab and desirable in wudu. Now, I mentioned in last week's lesson that one of the conditions or one of the faraiz of tayammum is that a person, he makes an intention before he performs his tayammum. So he has to make an intention that I am doing tayammum so that I can be clean, so that I can be pure to perform to perform namaz or to perform any other obligation which requires wudu or which requires purification. So one of the conditions for tayammum to be correct is that you make an intention before. And the reason why intention is considered farz and obligatory in tayammum is because the word tayammum, the Arabic word tayammum, literally means to intend. And in the Holy Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَإِن لَمْ تَجِدُوا مَاءً, that if you cannot find water, فَتَيَمَّمُوا صَعِيدًا طَيِّبًا, that do tayammum on the pure, dark substance of the earth. And those of you who've studied Arabic will know that the word tayammamu is an order from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is a command from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And commands and order from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala comes in the meaning of wujub, comes in the meaning of obligation or obligatory. So therefore, because of that reason, the Hanafi scholars in particular have said that when you make tayammum, before you make tayammum, it is a must, it is obligatory that you make an intention before. If you perform your tayammum without intention, then your tayammum will not be done. So this is what this particular text is indicating to you, that وَالنِّيَّةُ فَرْضٌ فِي التَّيَمُّمِ, that making a niyat or intention, it is farz in tayammum, whereas it is considered mustahab or sunnah in wuzu, and this was something which we looked at before under the wuzu section, that one of the sunnahs or one of the desirable acts of wuzu is to make an intention. The next text, Imam Quduri rahmatullah alayhi says, وَيَنْقُضُ التَّيَمُّمَ كُلُّ شَيْءٍ يَنْقُضُ الْوُضُوءَ, that those things which breaks a person's wuzu also breaks the tayammum as well. So those things which breaks a person's wuzu also breaks the tayammum as well. Now, I mentioned this in last week's lesson, that tayammum is considered a substitute for wudu. In the absence of water, the Sharia has said that you have to perform tayammum, and by performing tayammum, you now become clean, ritually clean, and park and purified to perform namaz and to perform any other ibadat and worships which requires wuzu. So tayammum is a substitute for wudu. So the rules which governs wuzu in terms of the nawaqis, in terms of the nullifiers, those rules also apply for tayammum as well. So we mentioned, or we looked at before, the things which breaks your wuzu, such as passing wind, such as vomiting, such as urinating, such as going to the toilet. These things breaks your wuzu. So similarly, if a person is in the state of tayammum, and if he was to pass wind, if a person in the state of tayammum, if he was to vomit, if a person in the state of tayammum was to bleed and his bleeding flows or from that wound or from that place, then all those situations, his tayammum will also break as well. And for the next namaz, the same way, if our wuzu had broken due to some bleeding, due to vomiting, before the next namaz comes, we have to redo our wuzu. So similarly, a person will also have to redo his tayammum before the next namaz comes, or before he starts the next prayer and the next namaz. So this is what this particular masla is indicating to you, that all those things which break the wuzu also breaks the tayammum as well. Then the author then goes on to mention وَيَنْقُضُهُ أَيْضًا رُؤْيَةُ الْمَاءِ, that there is something else which also breaks tayammum. Something else which does not break your wuzu, but actually it breaks your tayammum. And that is that if a person in the state of tayammum, if he sees water or if he finds some water. Because remember, tayammum is only prescribed in the absence of water. That when you cannot find water, that's when tayammum becomes obligatory and wajib to perform for namaz and for salah. Now what the author is saying here is that, look, the things which breaks your wuzu will also break your tayammum as well. Similarly, on top of that, if a person in the state of tayammum, if he was to find some water or if he was to see some water, then by finding some water or by seeing some water, it will automatically break his tayammum. So his tayammum will break. Now, there's a condition which is attached to this particular masla, and the condition is as long as you are capable of using the water. So just by seeing or finding the water, it doesn't necessarily mean that your tayammum there and there is broken. But there is a condition which is attached, and that is that if a person is capable of using the water. Now, capable could mean such as you're in the state of tayammum and you find some water. But the water which you find is so small in quantity, so less in quantity that you're not able to do wuzu. So in that situation, your tayammum will remain intact and your tayammum will not break, because the water which you have found is so small, is so less that you can't do wuzu with. Another example could be that, for example, just say you're on the plane and for some reason you couldn't find some water before or on the plane, so you did tayammum. So you're on the plane and you're in the state of tayammum. And then you see yourself flying over the Atlantic Ocean. So you look down and you see a lot of water. So by seeing the water or by finding the water there, your tayammum will not break, because it's going to be difficult for you to get hold of that water from the plane. Okay? So examples like could be like on the train, it could be on the car, say for example, and from afar you see some water. So your tayammum will not break, because at that particular time you're not capable of getting hold of that water. So in those situations, by seeing the water, by finding the water, your tayammum will not break. However, if you find the water and you're capable of using it and you have sufficient enough water to do wuzu, then automatically your tayammum will break. The next masla, the next ruling, the author mentions, وَلَا يَجُوزُ التَّيَمُّمْ إِلَّا بِصَعِيدٍ طَاهِرٍ, that it is not permissible or correct to perform tayammum besides or unless you use a park or pure soil or mud. Now, in last week's lesson, I mentioned the list on those things upon which tayammum is allowed and permissible. Now, what this particular text is telling us is that the thing which you are using for tayammum, and most of the time it's going to be stone, it's going to be mud, it's going to be soil, you have to make sure that the thing which you are doing tayammum from, that has to be pure and that has to be park. If for some reason you find out that the thing which you are doing tayammum from is not park, is not pure, but in fact it is impure, then you won't be able to do tayammum from that particular soil or from that particular mud. So I'll give you an example. Just say you've got some soil or some kind of earth in front of your house. So just say like people, they have like a front garden. So just say in the front garden, there's some earth there, there's some soil there, there's some mud there. So obviously that soil, that mud is pure, and if there is a udhr or if there is some kind of problems, then if you want, you can do tayammum from that particular soil or from that particular earth or ground. Now just imagine that before you were going to use that particular soil or mud, you see a dog who walks in front of your front garden and he urinates in that particular area. So a dog or any other kind of animal, he walks in front of your garden and then he urinates on that particular patch. Now, even though you may wash that particular patch up straight away, or even though you may not wash it, but the rays of the sun or the heat of the sun may absorb the impurity away. But because a dog or an animal had initially urinated on that particular patch of land, then it will not be permissible for you to do tayammum from that particular land ever. So you won't be able to do tayammum at all from that particular place. When you know that something impure, something najas has fallen on that particular ground, then it's not permissible for you to do tayammum from. Even though it does become park, so if you want to read namaz on top of that, that is okay. But you can't actually do tayammum from that particular batch of land. And the reason why the scholars have said this is because of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala saying in the Holy Quran, فَتَيَمَّمُوا صَعِيدًا طَيِّبًا, that the sa'id, i.e. the earth or the ground or the mud or the soil which you are using, it has to be tayyib. It has to be inherently clean, pure, park. No kind of impurity must have fallen on that place ever. So in that situation, when you know that this area is impure, you're not allowed to do tayammum from. That is something, it's totally different. Say, for example, you didn't know at all that a dog or some kind of animal has urinated on that particular area, and then you go and do tayammum. Then in that situation, your tayammum will be accepted, because we are not subjected to what happens on this particular land before we do tayammum. So what has happened before, just for example, if you went to the park and we're not sure whether an animal or someone had urinated there, we're not sure and there are no traces of impurity, then that's okay. We can actually do tayammum from that particular mud or soil. But when we know that a patch of land, an animal or someone has urinated on that particular area, or some impurities or some najas has fallen on that area, then it's not permissible for us to do tayammum from that particular area or from that particular ground. So this is what this particular text is telling us, that وَلَا يَجُوزُ التَّيَمُّمْ إِلَّا بِصَعِيدٍ طَاهِرٍ, that tayammum has to be done from a park and a pure substance or a pure mud or soil. The next text, Imam Quduri rahmatullahi says that it is mustahab liman lam yajdil ma, for that person who has got no water with him, wa huwa yarju, and he has hope أن يجده في آخر الوقت, that he will find the water at the end of the namaz time or just before the namaz is about to finish. أن يؤخر الصلاة, that he delays his salah and his prayer إلى آخر الوقت, until the last time. فإن وجد الماء, if he now goes on to find water, توضأ, he will do wuzu, وصلى, and he will pray, وإلا تيمم, otherwise he will do tayammum. Now the masla or the ruling which Imam Sab is indicating to from here is that there may be an occasion or a scenario where a person is traveling and he hasn't got water with him, but he thinks or he is confident that he will find water soon, or he is confident that before the namaz time finishes, he will reach somewhere, he will reach a service station, or he will go somewhere where he will find water. Or it could be a scenario where somebody has promised him that they will get him some water. Now, in that situation, the ruling or the masla is that it is mustahab and desirable that you delay your namaz all the way until the last possible time. And at the last possible time, if you find the water, then you will do wuzu and you will read your namaz. But if you cannot find water or you don't find water, then in that situation you will do tayammum and you will observe your namaz. So that is like the base ruling here, that it could be like traveling somewhere, you've got no water with you, but you know that there's a service station nearby, you know that there's going to be a place nearby where I could get some water. So in that situation, it is mustahab and desirable that you may continue with your journey, go to that particular place where you know there's water there, and delay your namaz all the way until that particular time. So take an example, say, for the Zuhr prayer. So just say Zuhr nowadays finishes, say, around 2:15. So you know that before 2:15, you're going to be reaching a place where there's plenty of water, where you can do wuzu and you can read your namaz. So in that situation, you should not pray your salah at Zuhr salah at the beginning time or at normal time when people tend to read around 1 o'clock. You should not read it at that time, but instead you should delay the Zuhr prayer until that particular time or that particular destination you reach where you find water. You should then do wuzu and perform your namaz. However, if you're traveling and that place where you thought that you'll find water, you cannot find that place, or for some reason you go to that place and there's no water there, then in that situation you will do tayammum and you will observe your namaz with tayammum. So that's what this particular text is highlighting. The next ruling here with regards to tayammum is وَيُصَلِّي بِتَيَمُّمِهِ مَا شَاءَ مِنَ الْفَرَائِضِ وَالنَّوَافِلِ. That with one tayammum, you can pray as many farz namazis and as many nafil namazis you want. Simple ruling, because tayammum is a substitute for wudu. So the same way with one wuzu, you can read as many farz namazis as you want. A person could do wuzu, say, before Maghrib prayer. So for the same wuzu which he read for Maghrib, he can also read for Isha. The same wuzu which he used to read the nafil prayers and the sunnat prayers after Maghrib, he can also use the same wuzu to pray the Isha namaz and to pray the sunnat and the nafils after Isha. So exactly same, because we mentioned before that tayammum is an exact replica and is an exact substitute for the wudu. So therefore, with one tayammum, you can pray as many nafil prayers, you can pray as many farz prayers as possible. As long as your wudu doesn't break, with that one tayammum, you can pray as many namazes you want. And the reason why this particular text was highlighted or was mentioned here, because some scholars like Imam Shafi rahmatullah alayhi say that you have to perform one tayammum, or for every namaz you have to perform one tayammum. So for every farz namaz this is, you have to perform one tayammum. So just say, for example, you may be traveling, so you performed a tayammum for Zuhr prayer. So according to Imam Shafi rahmatullah alayhi, The tayammum which you perform for the Zuhr prayer, you will be allowed to read the Zuhr prayer and also the sunnats for Zuhr. However, as soon as the Zuhr prayer finishes and the Asr time starts, then you will have to perform another tayammum, and with that tayammum you will have to pray your Asr prayer, the sunnats before you're allowed to pray with that tayammum, and so on. The same applies for Maghrib and the same applies for Isha. Whereas according to Imam Abu Hanifa rahmatullah alayh, he says that with one tayammum you can pray as many first prayers and as many nafil prayers you want. Now the next ruling, before I look at the text, I'll just give you the overview of this particular ruling, and then it will be more easier for us to understand what Imam Quduri rahmatullah alayh is trying to say. Now there are some namazes which does not have any qazas, or there are no compensation for missing them. And the two which comes to mind, and the two which are mentioned here, are the janazah prayer and the Eid prayer. So if a person was to miss the janazah prayer, then there is no qaza, meaning that he cannot afterwards by himself read janazah namaz at home. He cannot by himself afterwards go to another part of the masjid and read janazah namaz by himself. And as we're going to look at later, because janazah namaz is one of those prayers or namazes which requires jamaat and congregation. You can't read janazah prayer by yourself. Another example where a prayer or a salah does not have a qaza is the Eid prayer. Now when a person, when he misses his Eid prayer, then there is no qaza for that particular prayer. Again, we look at this in the Eid section, that some of our akabirin, some of our mashayikh have said that if a person did miss his Eid prayer, then he should pray Salatul Ishraq, 4 rakat Salatul Ishraq instead. But it's not, you don't have to pray, but they just said that because you committed a grave sin in missing the Eid prayer, then as a substitute or in terms of tawbah and repentance, then what you should do is that instead you should pray Salatul Ishraq. But generally speaking, when you miss your Eid prayer, there is no qaza, there is no kind of compensation for that. Now what the following masla is going to tell us is that janazah namaz and also the Eid namaz, not only these two namazes does not have a qaza, but also these two namazes are such that a lot of people attend the masjid, or there are a lot of people there. Like for janazah namaz, somebody has passed away, then a lot of people will come to the masjid. And for Eid namaz, as you know, there are always a lot of people for the Eid prayer. That's why you have 2-3 jamaats or 2-3 congregations per mosque over the UK. Why? Because a lot of people come. Now what may happen sometimes is that a person, he's in the Jamaat Khana, he's in the mosque area, and he's broken his wuzu. So Eid namaz is about to start, and he's broken his wuzu. Now if that person was to now, first of all, it's going to be a mission for him to leave the Jamaat Khana because there's so many people here. And then by the time he reaches the wuzu area, because there's a queue or because there's so many people, by the time he does his wuzu, then what may happen is that that person may miss his Eid namaz. Or a more better example will be with regards to the janazah prayer, because janazah prayer is very short. So if a person just before the janazah prayer, he broke his wuzu. Now if he goes to the wuzu area and does wuzu, by the time he does his wuzu and comes and joins the congregation, the janazah namaz will already be finished. So therefore, in the Hanafi fiqh, there is a special ruling here, or there is this kind of dispensation with regards to the Eid prayer and with regards to the janazah prayer. And the dispensation is that obviously if you've come to the masjid early, then you should come with wuzu. However, if a person fears that if he was to do wuzu, he will miss his Eid namaz, or if he was to do wuzu, he will miss his janazah prayer. So it could be so that, for example, he's come to the masjid without wuzu for the Eid prayer, and he now fears that the imam is about to start his namaz, and by the time he goes to the wuzu area, and he does the wuzu, the Imam is going to finish the Eid namaz, the Imam is going to finish the janazah prayer, then in that situation, it is permissible for him to do tayammum and join the namaz and start the namaz. It is permissible for him to just, if there's some dust around, quickly do tayammum and join the namaz, join the congregation, and his janazah namaz will be correct, and also his Eid namaz will be correct as well. So, and this is something which can happen as well. Obviously, in this masjid is slightly different because obviously the wuzu area is at the entrance. So people who are coming, then obviously it's much easier for them to do wuzu and then come into the Jamaat Khana and come into the masjid. But there are some masajids where the actual wuzu area is on the other side of the masjid, if you know what I mean. So when you come or when you enter the masjid, by the time you get past the Jamaat Khana and the mosque area and the corridor and the extension and so on, and by the time you reach the wuzu area, you may miss the janazah namaz, you may miss the Eid namaz. So for them, there is a kind of dispensation here, there is some kind of flexibility, and that is that what they can do is do tayammum on a rock or on some soil or mud outside, and then join the congregation, and the Eid namaz will be correct, and also the janazah namaz will be correct. And remember, this particular dispensation is only for those two prayers, i.e. those two prayers which does not have any qadha, i.e. the janazah prayer and the Eid prayer. Those prayers which has a compensation, which has a qadha, i.e. the Jummah prayers and the normal 5 daily prayers, then this flexibility and this concession would not be applicable. We're going to look at this in the Jummah section, that if a person misses a Jummah prayer, even though if he did it intentionally or without any reason, then it's a great sin. But there is a qaza there is a compensation, and that is that he should perform his Zuhr Salah instead. So therefore, if a person, say, arrives at the masjid and Jummah Salah is about to finish, he comes really late to the masjid, say, when the Imam is, say, in his second rakat or in the tashahhud position, and he now fears that if he is to do wuzu, go to the toilet, do wuzu, by the time he finishes his wuzu, the Imam will finish the Jummah. So in that situation, he would not be allowed to do tayammum and join the congregation. Why? Because there is a substitute, there is a qadha for the Jummah prayer, and that is a Zuhr prayer. So in that situation, he will be compelled to do wuzu, and then if he, after finishing wuzu, if he finds the Imam still in the Jummah prayer, then obviously he will join the Jummah prayer. But if the Imam has already finished the Jummah prayer, then in that situation he will read Zuhr instead. And the same also applies for the normal prayers as well. That just say if a person wakes up really late, say for Fajr prayer, only 5 minutes left, or say only 2 minutes left, and he fears that if he was to go to the bathroom and do wuzu, he will miss his Fajr prayer. His Fajr prayer will become qadha. So in that situation, because for the 5 daily prayers there is a qaza, i.e. qaza meaning that you read the same namaz in another time, so therefore that individual would not be allowed to just do tayammum, say on his walls or on some dust, and then read the namaz, but instead he will be compelled to actually do wuzu and then read the namaz. Obviously if he finds it and there's still time left and he finds it, then he will read the namaz, otherwise he will have to do qaza at another time. So that is the usul, or that is the particular principle here. So if you have a look at the text, Imam Quduri Rahmatullah says, وَيَجُوزُ التَّيَمُّمْ لِلسَّحِي الْمُقِيمِ, that it is permissible and lawful to do tayammum لِلسَّحِي, for a healthy person. So it's not like ill, he's not sick or something, he's not like really ill where, as we looked at in last week's lesson, that where he may find it difficult to do wuzu. But this person, there's nothing wrong with him. It was his fault. It was out of his laziness that he arrived late for the Eid Salah, or he arrived late for the Janazah Salah. So this person, he's Sahih, there's nothing wrong with him. Al-Muqim, and he's also a resident as well. So he's like a local person. So again, if he wanted, he could have done wuzu at home. But again, due to his laziness, he didn't even do wuzu at home. He didn't do anything at home. He just came to the masjid and he just sees, janazah is about to finish, or the Eid Salah is about to finish. إِذَا حَضَرَتْ جَنَازَةٌ وَالْوَلِيُّ غَيْرُهُ. Now the author, Imam Quduri Rahmatullah, looks at it firstly from the janazah point of view, And he says that a person, he comes to the masjid and he sees that the janazah salah is about to start. And then the author mentions, وَالْوَلِي غَيْرُهُ, i.e. he is not the close relative of the deceased. Now again, we will look at this particular ruling under the janazah section, that generally speaking, especially like in the UK where obviously you don't have Amirul Mu'minin, you don't have a leader, according to some scholars, the most worthy of leading the janazah prayer is, number one, the deceased close relatives, such as his son, such as his father, such as his brothers, and so on. And then afterwards comes the Imamul Hay, the local Imam. Whereas the majority of the jurists have said that the local Imam is more worthy of leading a prayer than the deceased son or the deceased parents or the deceased brothers and so on. But in whichever situation, whoever is most worthy of leading a prayer, it doesn't matter. But in both situations, whoever the closest relative is of the deceased, so it could be the deceased son, he always has a right and a haq that if he did not pray the janazah salah, he has a haq and a right to repeat the janazah salah again. So just say, for example, like some brother, they just read the janazah namaz of this individual without his son being present. So if afterwards the son finds out, he can actually repeat the janazah salah. So this text in front of us, the author is saying that this person who's come late for the janazah salah, he's not a wali, he's not the close relative of the deceased where he could exercise his right and say, oh, I want to repeat the janazah salah, or wait for me and let me go and do wuzu and then we will do the janazah salah together. He's not like that. He's just like a normal person who just got no relatives, got no connection with the deceased. He comes late for the janazah prayer because he's got no right to repeat the janazah salah. So therefore, the author goes on to mention, فَخَافَ إِنِ اشْتَغَلَ بِالطَّهَارَةِ أَن تَفُوتَهُ صَلَاةُ الْجَنَازَةِ, that he fears that if he was to do wuzu, he will miss his janazah salah. فَلَهُ أَن يَتَيَمَّمَ وَيُصَلِّيَ, then it is permissible and lawful for him to do tayammum and pray the janazah salah. Because as I explained, that if he was to go and do wuzu, he will miss his janazah salah. So therefore there is a dispensation, a concession the Sharia has given him, and that is that such a person can do tayammum and read the janazah salah. And the next text goes on to say, وَكَذَلِكَ مَنْ حَضَرَ الْإِيدِ, that the same rule also applies for the Eid salah as well. That somebody comes for the Eid prayer and he fears that if he was to go and do wuzu, he will miss the Eid namaz, then in that situation it is permissible and lawful for him to do tayammum and join the Jamaat, join the congregation for the Eid prayer. And then the next text goes on to say, وَإِنْ خَافَ مَنْ شَهِدَ الْجُمُعَةِ إِنْ اشْتَغَلَ بِالطَّهَارَةِ أَنْ تَفُوتَهُ الْجُمُعَةِ تَوَضَّعَ. The next text goes on to mention with regards to the Jummah prayer that this particular concession and leeway and flexibility is not applicable for the Jummah prayer, because for a Jummah prayer there is a qaza, there is a compensation, and that is the 4 rakat Zuhr prayer. So therefore this particular leeway and concession does not apply for the Jummah prayer, and also does not apply for the normal 5 daily prayers. The next few texts just mentions some miscellaneous rulings with regards to a musafir or a traveler, that if he was to forget that he had some water and he prayed his salah, then what would happen, what is the exact ruling. So we're just going to very briefly look at the next few miscellaneous rulings. Now the author Imam Quduri rahmatullahi mentions, وَالْمُسَافِرِ إِذَا نَسِيَ الْمَاءَ فِي رَحْلِهِ فَتَيَمَّمَ وَصَلَّى, that there was a traveler or a musafir and he has forgotten that he had some water with him. So a musafir, generally speaking, when they're traveling, they always carry water with them. It's like, for example, when you are traveling, especially in the cold weather, you'll always have some kind of water in your boot. So similarly, a musafir or a traveler, generally speaking, when he's traveling, he will always have a container of water with him. But this particular musafir or traveler, what happened was that he completely forgot that he had some water with him. Then what did he do? فَتَيَمَّمَ وَصَلَّى. He thought that, oh, I got no water with me, let me do tayammum. So he did tayammum and he prayed. ثُمَّ ذَكَرَ الْمَاءَ فِي الْوَقْتِ. And then he remembers that I had some water with me. I had a container of water. Now the question is that does this person have to repeat the namaz which he had read or not? So according to Imam Abu Hanifa rahmatullah, he says that such a person does not have to repeat his namaz. So the namaz which was read, even though he had water with him in his car or in his caravan or in those days when they would travel on camels and horses, so even though he had some water with him, but because he totally forgot that he had water and he did tayammum and he prayed namaz, so according to Imam Abu Hanifa rahmatullah, such a salah and such a namaz will be accepted and he does not have to repeat it. And the next ruling then goes on to mention that وَلَيْسَ عَلَى الْمُتَيَمِّمِ إِذَا لَمْ يَغْلِبْ عَلَى ظَنِّهِ أَنَّ بِقُرْبِهِ مَا أَن يَطْلُبَ الْمَاءَ. So the next ruling goes on to say that if a musafir or a traveler, if he's traveling somewhere and his gut feeling is that nearby there is no water at all, that he's like in the middle of nowhere and he knows that there's no water within a 1 mile radius, even like 10-mile radius, he knows that there's no water nearby. So unlike the previous ruling where I mentioned that if a person is confident that there is some water nearby, he will have to delay his namaz all the way until the last possible time. And if he finds the water, he will do wuzu, otherwise he will do tayammum. But in this situation, the author is saying that, look, if a person knows that there is no water nearby, then he does not have to delay his namaz all the way until the last possible time. But instead, if he wants, he can do tayammum there and there, and he can read his namaz at the beginning time. Okay, even though, like say, Zuhur starts at 12 o'clock. So even though there's still 2 hours left before Zuhur finishes, but if a person is confident that, look, I'm in the middle of nowhere, middle of a desert, there's no water nearby at all. So in that situation, if he wants at 12 o'clock when Zuhur Salah starts, the tayammum and read his namaz, that is also allowed, that is also permissible as well. Because the next ruling then goes on to say that if a person is confident or his gut feeling is that ala ظنه أن هناك ما لم يجوز له أن يتيمم حتى يطلبه. That if his feeling or his kind of assumption is that there is actually some water nearby, so as I mentioned that it would not be permissible for him to just do tayammum and read namaz, but instead he will have to look and seek for the water. And the last ruling of the tayammum section, the author mentions وَإِنْ كَانَ مَعَ رَفِيقِهِ مَاءٌ طَلَبَهُ مِنْهُ قَبْلَ أَن يَتَيَمَّمَ فَإِنْ مَنَعَهُ مِنْهُ تَيَمَّمَ وَصَلَّى. So the last ruling is with regards to if you are traveling with some friends or with some companions, or like for example you're traveling and you see some people. Now the question is that should you ask them for water or not? Now the ruling is that if they have some water, then you should ask them. Before you start tayammum, then you should ask them that can I borrow some water for wuzu? And if they give it, then that's good. You should do wuzu and then read namaz. However, if they refuse, then as the author says, tayammama wa salla, you should then do tayammum and pray the namaz. So what this particular text is telling us at the end is that, just say you're traveling with friends or companions, or you've gone or you're going past a particular group of people, then if you think that these people have some water, or your friend who you know who's got a bucket of water or a container of water, then what you should do is that you should ask them that can I use some water for wuzu? If they give it, then obviously you should then use it, do the wuzu and read namaz. But if they don't, then you should do tayammum and read namaz. Another question here is that, just say for example, if a person knows that his friend's got some water, but he doesn't ask them. He doesn't ask him, or he knows some people, they've got some water, but he doesn't ask them, and instead he just does tayammum and reads his namaz. Would his namaz be accepted or not? So the masla is that his namaz will be accepted. Because asking your friend or asking those people whether I can use some water or not is only mustahab and desirable. And the reason why it's mustahab and desirable is because the ruling or the principle is that if something belongs to someone, then generally speaking, you should not really ask that person for it. If something belongs to that person, like for example, it could be mobile phones or it could be laptops and so on. So generally speaking, according to custom, we don't ask other people, can I use your laptop or can I use your mobile phone? Generally speaking, obviously when there's a need or necessity, then you do. But generally speaking, if someone's wearing a coat, you don't ask him, can I use a coat today or can I use your trousers today? Whatever belongs to him, it belongs to him. You don't really ask him. So it's the same here with regards to water as well, that when a person's got a container of water, then that's his water. So again, he may need it because he's traveling as well. So obviously he may need the water for wuzu himself. He may need the water for drinking purposes. He may need the water for something. So if a person doesn't ask that brother, doesn't ask that person or his friend who's got water, and instead he just does tayammum and reads the namaz, then his namaz will be accepted. So what I'm trying to say from this particular text is that it's only mustahab and desirable to ask a companion or to ask a friend for water. If he doesn't give it, you should ask him, because you never know, he may give it to you. If he doesn't give it to you, then obviously you should just do tayammum and read the namaz. So alhamdulillah, that concludes the tayammum section. Inshallah, next week our lesson will be on masa al-khuffayn, with regards to doing masa on leather socks. So inshallah, that will be the topic or subject for next week. May Allah subhanahu give us the tawfiq to act on what has been said. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillah rabbil alamin. Do you have any questions you'd like to ask for?
Be a student of knowledge.